right, we're live.
Woo! For the people online who may not know, this is Mark Simons. He's a phenomenal storyboard artist with titles like, you know, The Walking Dead, Stranger Things, The Amazing Miss Mabel. Maisel?
Marvelous Mrs. Maisel.
I was
Very
a big
close.
fan. Anyways, we're going to start off with a Q&A right now. So I believe our first question was over here. Or we're going to go here first. How was your day?
Really? My day was actually great. I had a really great creative meeting with an independent producer working on a short that he's going to use to pitch his series with. And anytime I get to work with creative people and draw is a great fucking day.
Maybe I could read the book, but why were there 30 kids after you?
The 30 came after me because a few of the ringleaders who... All right, I'll back up.
This is the...
Well, like I said, there's a lot of backstory. I'm not tall now. I was really short in high school. But I ran a construction company since the time I was 14. I was building multi-million-dollar homes in Houston. And because my entire life was construction, I was built like a bodybuilder. I was just rock solid. And so this gang was running rampant over the school, and because I was short, they kept trying to bully me. And I was telling guys 4 times my age, who weighed 350 pounds, what to do every day. So high school kids didn't mean shit to me. So I wouldn't let them bully me, and when they tried to hurt me or do something, it was very easy for me to get rid of them, because I was just stronger than everyone else. That built up until one weekend, one of the guys punched me in the mouth at the same party a week before, and it didn't even budge me. I just looked at him and said, "Perry, you're not worth it." And that embarrassed him in front of all of his friends. So the next weekend, he had gotten a very large group together, same outdoor party, and about 10 or 15 attacked me in my car, and I drove to get away from them right through the middle of the party to get away, and everyone else thought I was the asshole. So the entire party came after me, pulling sticks out of the bonfire and chains and bats and everything out of their trucks. It was Texas, right? Everything except guns.
Where's the
And
shop?
let's hope. So I literally felt like the Frankenstein monster, because here I am stuck in the dark, and all these people with these flaming torches are coming after me. So I actually had to jump my car over a ravine. And I had a 1963 T-Bird that I had rebuilt. I had to jump it over a ravine and land in the middle of the road, and drove home. And the ringleaders, there's a couple of them, grabbed a few of their friends, and they came to my house, and that's when they attacked my family.
I'm sorry, but also you're so cool. Oh my
It was, you know, what's really funny, and it's part of one of the epilogues in the book, is, so this took place the beginning of my junior year. I was 16, and we had the court trial in early December of that year. It took about 3 months to go through everything, and because it was fast track, because the judge knew these kids, he wanted to get rid of them. And so I failed one of my classes, the math. I was a mathlete, so I was in all the advanced math classes, straight A student, up until they were attacking me, and I started failing classes because I couldn't concentrate. And that gave me extra time for art, which led me into theater. I had never even seen a play, and all of a sudden, because I had been building homes, I started designing and building all the sets for the school. But here's where the really funny part. So November of my junior year, I'm being constantly attacked and harassed, and my family's being attacked constantly, and I'm living in a state of fear. In April, I was in the school talent show wearing a pink tutu.
Yes.
They didn't fuck with my life. So, thanks for the question. Got a guy back here.
Is there like any evidence about that attack?
Do you have
Well, this took place in 1986, and when I went back to the courthouse, they had actually thrown out all the old stuff. Nothing was computerized. We didn't have computers back then. However, I still have all of my court documents, and they're scanned and in the back of the book.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. And I have the original diaries that my entire family kept because the judge told us to keep diaries of what was going on that could be used as evidence in the trial. I even scanned some of those pages. Some of those are in the book as well. So yeah, all the information I saved is there. In fact, my mom put together the file for it, and you guys will get a kick out of this. And there's a scan of the actual file in the book. She always called them the assholes. She would never call them by name. It's just the assholes. It's called the assholes file, and that's what's on the label.
Wait, is there like assholes number 1, number 2, and number 3?
We just call them the assholes, plural.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
So you said that you like owned a construction company before this.
My father owned it. I was the construction coordinator. Well, I was the superintendent. I became the superintendent when I was 14.
Nice.
And they gave me a car and told me not to act like an idiot, and I never got pulled over.
Nice. So what led you to leave that path and start being a creative?
I'm a creative. I didn't want to build homes. One of the hardest things I've ever done in my life was to tell my dad I didn't want to take over the business. That was a really difficult conversation because it was called Simon Corporation, right? And we were doing really well. And I was running the damn thing. I was running all the job sites. I had been for years and years and years. And I just wanted to be an artist. I mean, because even then, you know, like I had my contract with Schwinn. I was designing skateboards for Schwinn, and I had stickers with them. And then I started doing marketing. So I was designing all the signage and all the ads for the company. And then a lot of our vendors started seeing it. So I started designing signage and marketing and business cards and flyers, all this kind of stuff for all of our vendors. And then that led me, when I was in high school, to opening up a marketing company, which I then took to college. I paid my way through college designing advertising. So I would literally drive to school past 2 billboards I had designed on my way to an advertising class. It's kind of heady. So that was my life. I wanted to tell stories. I wanted to be a cartoonist. That was actually my first love, still one of my main loves. All the world's top cartoonists are friends of mine. I made sure I became friends with them. And I did have a syndicated cartoon for a while called Hollyweird. But my syndicate folded, and there went my strip. I guess you're going to have to wait. There's a bunch of hands in the back. But up here we have a hand too.
Could you walk us a little bit through how you first got your start in storyboarding for television?
What'd I tell you?
Something
Yes,
like that.
yes, how I got my start too. Okay, so I'm going to give you the longer answer. I gave you the shortened one. All right, so I'm living in LA. I didn't know storyboards existed, right? I knew all about animation, and originally I wanted to be an animator when I first moved out there. So when I first moved to LA, I did a test for He-Man. This is in 1986, is when I moved out to LA. And I didn't have a tablet or an animation stand at all with me. I was traveling. I didn't even have a permanent place to live yet. And so they just gave me one. They just gave me a disc and said, here, do the test. Now, I was self-taught. There were no animation classes anywhere except maybe Cal Arts back then. And because I was self-taught, I knew how to do dope sheets my way, not the way the industry did. So when I brought back my He-Man stuff and I gave him my dope sheet, He-Man was supposed to run across this room, slide into an elevator, and the doors would close. Well, my He-Man ran right through the back of the elevator. So I failed the test, and so I started working in live action. And I don't know if any of you, most of you are probably too young to know Roger Corman. He's the king of B-budget movies. He was the biggest independent producer who had ever lived through the 60s and 70s. Gave half of Hollywood at the time their start. Like Jim Cameron got his start there. Jim was there about 2 years before I was there. I was hired as construction coordinator on a movie called Slave Girls from Beyond Infinity. 2 weeks in, I became the art director. And then I art directed and production designed from then on, which was fun, but I wasn't drawing, I was designing. I wanted to draw more. And because I was working in the industry, I was seeing storyboards a lot. So I put together some samples of storyboards, and I went to Storyboards Inc., which was the largest storyboard agency in the world. And I just walked in, introduced myself to someone sitting at the front table, and I said, hey, I'd like to be a story artist. Would you like to take a look at my stuff? He said, sure, stranger. Looked at my stuff, said, nope, all this is wrong. I went, oh, okay. What should I do different? Do you have any samples? and he gave me a couple of printed samples that they used to market their people, and said, feel free to come back anytime. A week later, I was back. New samples. Good, better, still not good. A week later, I showed up with new samples. And I showed up every week until they finally either got tired of seeing me or started placing me. And they gave me a Honda commercial. It was my first job. And at the time, I was designing and building the sets for an HBO series called First and 10 with O.J. Simpson, and which is also where I met my wife. I went to her to sign my contract. And I went to the executive producer, and I showed him some of the stuff I've been doing. I said, look, I'm on staff anyway on the show. At some point, you're going to need storyboards. I'm here, use me. And a week later, he called me and gave me one of the episodes and actually asked me to rewrite the episode because it wasn't scary enough. It was a scary humor show, and they had the humor, but nothing was scary. And I just said, sure, I can do it, and then stayed up all night watching horror movies trying to figure out what all the tropes were that I could make fun of. So I started building a slow portfolio. Then the big earthquake hit Frisco. This is the longer version, I promise you. The big quake hit Frisco in '89. My fiance, now my wife, freaked out. Said, we have to get the hell out of here. We can't stay in LA anymore. And so I said, all right, I'll turn down my next job. And she was ramping out a movie at the time. Chicago's too cold. We didn't want to live in New York. Orlando was up and coming, so we moved to Orlando. Now, my background in art direction was much deeper than storyboarding at the time. So we both started working at Nickelodeon. I became the second designer at Nickelodeon on their live action productions. And so I actually opened the Nickelodeon sound stages there at Universal. And
what did you work on?
Clarissa Explains It All, Gullah Gullah Island, Allegra's, well, my
you
wife
on
did
Erie,
Allegra's.
Indiana?
Hmm?
Were you on Erie, Indiana?
No, that was done in Canada.
Okay.
I was trying to think what some of Welcome Freshmen. Guts. I was one of the designers of the Aggro Crag on Guts. For any of you who watch that. So and Double Dare, you know, all that kind of stuff. So I storyboarded what few things we needed storyboarding at Nickelodeon, and then I heard that Steven Spielberg was coming into town. And there was an old show called Sequest. It was like Star Trek underwater, futuristic submarine show. And it was the biggest show on TV, Steven Spielberg and sci-fi. I was like, I want this show. And 15 minutes later, literally 15 minutes after I found out he was coming, I was the full-time story artist for Steven Spielberg. And I can share that story with you too, if you want. But that's how I became a storyboard artist. That's when I went full-time storyboarding. Do you want to hear how I got the Spielberg?
Yes.
Okay. It's a fun story. I have nowhere else to go, so I'll answer all your questions. I spent tonight just for you guys. All right. So I'm at Nickelodeon. So just to kind of give you a lay of the land, at Universal Studios in Orlando, we had 7 sound stages. 2 of them were dedicated to Nickelodeon, stages 18 and 19. They sandwiched our production office space. The first floor was art department grip, which is where I had my office. Second floor was editorial and audio. Third floor was production, where my wife was working. So I'm on the first floor, and someone is telling me, hey, Spielberg is in town. They moved Sequest here. I was like, oh, I was wondering what was taking over all these other sound stages. And I thought, how am I going to meet someone on this show? And like every good artist, I had my portfolio with me, even though I was staffed at Nickelodeon. I never went anywhere without it. And this is before the internet. There was no online. Everything was print at the time. But I had it with me. So I called a friend of mine who was in the same office building. It's called Building 22A, where I knew they were going to be officed. It was the only place where incoming productions held stuff. I had a friend who had an office there. You all have this friend. It's the friend who never shuts the fuck up. The one who talks to everybody, whether they want her to or not. Her name is Patty. You all know Patty. If you don't know Patty, guess what? You're Patty. So I call her. I said, Patty, I know you met someone on the Sequest show. I don't care who it is. Who have you met? And she goes, oh, I had lunch the other day with a construction coordinator. I went, holy shit, fantastic. I started as a construction coordinator. I want you to introduce me, and I hung up before she could say no. I grabbed my portfolio, and I hoofed it over. It was only about 100 yards between our offices. I walk up, she was on the second floor. I walk into her office, I said, all right, Patty, come on, let's go find this guy. She goes, his name is Mike. I went, great, let's find Mike. And she's like, okay. Easily swayed. So we go walking down, we're walking in between the sound stages. Sure enough, Mike is walking out of one of the sound stages. And she goes, hey, Mike. He goes, hey, Patty, how you doing? And she goes, hey, Mike, I'd like you to meet this good friend of mine, Mark Simon, designer here in town. At which point, I now forget Patty exists. I'm like, Mike, dude, the sets are freaking amazing on this thing. I would love to get in on the show. He goes, well, what do you do? I said, I do set design and storyboarding. I knew I couldn't get in as an art director because I know how those shows work. They're bringing in all the top people. But I figured one of those positions will get me in working with Spielberg. And he goes, you know what? We're actually hiring both positions. I said, awesome. Who do I need to talk to? He goes, well, probably the production designer, Vaughn Edwards. I said, great. Is he around? He goes, I think he's in his office. I said, cool. Would you introduce me? And he said, sure. And walks me up the stairs to Vaughn's office. Vaughn's sitting there. Mike knocks on the door. Says, hey, Vaughn, just met this great designer here in town. Never saw any of my work. It's amazing. If you're confident, people just assume you're fucking great. All right? Just remember that. This happened to me a lot, where people just assume I'm good. I don't tell them otherwise. Well, I ain't. So now at this point, I forget Mike exists, because I'm focused on the guy who can hire me, Vaughn. He said, so what do you do? I tell him storyboarding and set design. He's great, we're actually looking for both. I show him my portfolio, he flips through it, said, yeah, this stuff is great. Either one works for me. I don't make the final decision. I said, okay, who does? He said, it would be Oscar Costo, our supervising producer. I said, cool. What do you think I asked? Would you introduce me? He said, sure. And he gets up and walks me down to this gigantic office in the corner. Oscar's sitting way in the back. It's all dark except there's one light above him. Really intimidating dude, right? Just sitting there like a grouch in the corner. Vaughn knocks on the door. Said, hey, Oscar, got Mark here. He's a great designer in storyboards. Both look great to me. I'll leave it up to you. Wait for you. Walk in. I put my portfolio in. They were big. I laid down in front of him, and literally this is what he did. Okay, and that's how long he took looking at my portfolio. And I'm thinking, ooh, I don't like this. That was way too short. And he said, all right, look, to be fair, I've met a lot of people around here who can do design just like you can. I'm thinking, oh, this is not going any better than I was afraid. He said, but you're the only person I've seen here who understands anything about storyboarding. You're our new story artist. And that was it. We didn't even negotiate rate. He just hired me right there. Wow. Within 15 minutes. And now I work full-time. And I never art directed since, literally. I didn't. I gave it up full-time. And I loved every freaking minute of it.
Hello.
Hello.
So what would you say was your biggest creative setback? What did you learn from it, and how did you overcome it?
I've got a couple that are fun, which I'm now willing to talk about. I wouldn't even admit to them for years. One of my books is called Start at the Top. I've had a tendency my entire life not to work my way up. I generally jump right to the top of everything. Like the first training program I ever wrote, I ended up selling to the largest real estate company in the world, Remax. And it's always been that way. So one of the chapters, and the reason I'm bringing up, one of the chapters in the book called Fuck Ups. So one of these stories I'm going to tell you is one of the examples of fuck ups. As I mentioned, I first wanted to be an animator. So I was going around meeting people in animation when I first moved out to LA. And somehow, I don't remember how, somehow I got into Hanna-Barbera. And I end up in the office with Bill Hanna and Joe Barbera. And I'm showing them my animation samples, which were all independent pieces, just stuff I did on my own. And they said, none of this is the quality that we would hire. You're not good enough. Come back in 8 or 10 years. That's not the bad part. The bad part is this big mouth. As I said, you'll be hearing of me before you hear from me. Well, they died before I became anything, so I was wrong. Okay, story number 2, major fuck-ups.
But they didn't hear from you.
No, I never, well, that was true. They never heard from me because I didn't work in live action. Now, to be fair, I have owned 2 animation studios, so I have done a lot in animation as well. And I've produced animation for a number of feature films, but nope, they didn't know shit about me. So that was kind of embarrassing. There was another time I had an agent with Gersh, who's repping me. I think for my animations. Actually, it's been so long I don't really remember. And he called me one day, and he said, "Do you know Tim?" Oh God, now I blank on his last name. He was the director and writer of SpongeBob movie. I can't think of Tim's last name. I should. I worked with him for years. He had been one of the executive producers of Welcome Freshmen at Nickelodeon. And instead of just listening, I said, "Yeah, he's kind of a weasel." I got fired from one of his shows because when he wouldn't give me enough information, I would track him down in the hallways and he would lock himself behind his door in his office to keep me from pestering him for the info I needed. All of which is true, doesn't make me the good guy by any stretch of the imagination. Instead, I should have said why I would love to work with him. I didn't. Tim would no longer ever take my phone call, and that was to develop the SpongeBob movie. So there are times that this big mouth needs to shut the fuck up. But hopefully you remember things like that and you don't repeat it. So thanks for having me share that.
All right, next one over here.
All right, yes.
Okay, so on the flip side of that coin,
Yeah.
what habits, practices, or aspects of your personality do you attribute your success to?
I never give up. I never stop. If there's something I don't know, I learn it. And I learn it better than anyone else around me. And luckily, I'm able to also learn from books. And I'm also not afraid of new technologies. So I have pioneered a lot of things in the industry. Like the Storyboard Pro, won the Emmy, the Primetime Engineering Emmy, after I worked with the engineers to redevelop it to work for all types of production. I pioneered virtual directing audio for voiceover artists. In fact, Post Magazine 20 or 25 years ago wrote an article about it because I was the first one that did it with New York Audio Studios. So there's a lot of things. I don't procrastinate. I don't stop. I'm by no means the best artist. I am one of the best story artists because I learned very quickly it's not about the quality of the art, it's about the quality of the story. And then you better be a damn good artist on top of it. But you know, all that stuff can be learned. And I'm also really good at self-promotion. So, you know, you can be the best in the world, but if no one knows it, they don't have the opportunity to hire you. And once I realized that, I made sure that people knew who I was. When I first moved here to Atlanta, I started in LA, obviously, then I went to Orlando, and then I moved here. First thing I did is I started talking to the big groups like Women in Film and obviously ASIFA and other groups, so that the local people who could hire me knew me. So I do whatever I can to make sure I'm in front of people. I also wrote for Animation Magazine for years. I wrote for AWN for years. I wrote for Cinefex, Filmmaker Magazine, Movie Maker Magazine. I've been flown all around the world to lecture at studios and at conferences because people knew who I was. So kind of all that together.
Thank you. And one little side comment I forgot to mention earlier, but Storyboard Pro did dub you the godfather of storyboarding, correct?
They did. They were doing a magazine or newsletter for a while, and they first called me the godfather of storyboarding, and then another periodical picked that up and called me the godfather. And I thought, well, that sounds pretty cool. I'll take it. And then someone said, why don't you just call yourself chairman of the board? I went, ooh, I like that too. But that's not as obvious that they're talking about storyboarding. So I kept godfather.
Love it, yeah. All right, our next question.
Yes.
So I know you said that you had previously lived in LA.
Yeah.
And I was wondering what that was like, and also like how much different was it like then as to now living in LA for the industry?
It was incredibly freakishly expensive then. It's more freakishly expensive now. The smog was horrific then, and it's much better now. It's nowhere near as bad. I used to literally hose off my house twice a year, and you just watch the black crud run off the siding when I was out there. I loved living in LA. I thought it was exciting. I loved all the events that were going on. I loved all the behind the scenes, and I missed that until I moved here. There's actually a lot here too in Atlanta. So moving here gave me a lot of what I was missing from there, but it's a lot easier to afford a really good life here. So I don't miss LA, but I go back whenever I want to get my fill.
For your so I was wondering, how long did it take for you to get to the point on your first job in basically in animation or art design? Like, how long did it take you to get to that point?
Get the point of what?
Of getting a job as in a storyboard artist or
I've never not worked. So I've always been able to work. I've made six figures since the first year I started working.
I think he needs more of the timeline of when you started pestering those people, being like, are these boards good enough? I think.
Oh, when I
that's
went to
your
the
job.
agency, all right, so there's a couple different things. I'll answer in an extended way. As far as storyboarding, it was about 6 weeks of my going back before I had samples good enough. They saw how quickly I was doing it because I was tenacious enough to show up literally every week, that they put me on the Honda spot. And I was working full-time as an art director and designer at that point anyway, so that was just extra stuff for me. With art directing, when I first got to LA, I knew my way in to Hollywood was construction because I had built homes, and I did theater, obviously, so I had pictures of everything, so I had a portfolio showing how I could design and build stuff. But I didn't know how sets were built differently than real life. So the first thing I did is I drove over to a company called Serrurier, it's hard to say, Serrurier and Associates. It's in Pasadena, in northeast LA, the largest set building house in the city. And I just walked in, I asked to speak to the owner. It's also one of my tricks. I never speak to someone who can tell me no. I only want to talk to the person who can tell me yes. So I didn't talk to anyone else. I only wanted to speak to the owner. 10 minutes later, he hired me. And so I worked there about 3 months, and I asked a ton of questions in every area. I learned everything I could rapidly. And then I just started looking at the trades on who was looking, and I found that at Corman Studio, they were looking for a construction coordinator on a sci-fi movie, which at the time they were promoting called Beyond Infinity. Slave Girls had not reared its ugly head yet. And so I got the job as construction coordinator. First movie I ever applied to, I got, and then I was an art director 2 weeks later. When that movie wrapped, a week after that, I was an art director on another movie. And a week after that movie wrapped, I was art director on another movie. And each one, I doubled my income. So it was just really quick. Yeah.
I saw a few people first who put their hands up here and then down there. So who was you first? All right, and then I've seen you.
Hi. It's pretty clear that your confidence in yourself has been pretty integral to your success. Has that always been in you, or was that a skill you had to develop?
Well, when you're a 12-year-old who has a contract with Schwinn and you're a champion skateboarder, that makes you kind of heady. running a crew where I'm literally telling 100 guys what to do every day when you're still in middle school builds confidence. And I don't know how long it took, but part of what had happened with all that is because I'm telling these huge construction guys who, I've been doing this 30 years, and I go, I don't care how long you've been doing it. That's not right. I want you to do it this way. Right? This voice started turning into this voice when I was a little guy, so they would take me a bit more seriously. Plus the fact my dad owned the company, I knew that I was safe, and that just built. So, you know, like I said, 14, I'm driving a car, you know. I was parking, because I had to drive to middle school, because I would drive to the job sites in the morning, open up the job sites, drive to middle school and park with the teachers, because there is no one else driving. And then I would drive back to the job sites, finish up all the work, shut them down, and drive home for dinner. That was my middle school and high school life. So I did not have a normal upbringing. So it's not anything that can really be replicated, but my parents were very good about praising me constantly. When I stood up for myself, even to these guys, it scared the shit out of my dad at times. And then my mom would say, are you kidding? You should do that. So I would hear stuff like that and it made me feel better. And it just kind of grew to the point that, yeah, I could kind of deal with anything. It didn't matter what hit me.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, I was tested with that fucking thing. Which, by the way, I did have a nervous breakdown. It's not like I just skated. It destroyed me for 3 or 4 months. But I just got over it quickly.
So if, like, have you ever, like, suffered with, like, self-doubt, or if you did, like, what kind of advice would you give to, like, artists who also, like, deal with self-doubt a lot?
Crippling self-doubt, no. I'm lucky as far as that goes. That said, there are moments before I start almost every job where I go, what the fuck am I doing? And then as soon as I step in front of someone or get on the call, all that disappears and I'm rocking and rolling. So the lead up to something, there's always that little bit, you know, if I have 5 hours where I'm not working, of course that thought is, God, am I ever going to work again? And then by the end of the day, I have another job. So it goes away quickly. We all suffer from some of that. Luckily, at this point, I've done so much for so long, I just know I'm always going to get work, and I know I'm good. So hopefully you grow out of it, but there's always that little bit that's up there pecking away at you at times.
Also,
But self-talk helps. I'm very good at telling myself that I'm great. And my mom was great about telling me that. Dad, I guess he did, but it was mostly mom.
I was gonna say, if you're comfortable with it, we're gonna do Q&A until 8:30 and then break for the mixer. Are you comfortable with that?
Go as long as you want.
All right, so any other questions? All right, I'm gonna give it to Zane because he's in arm reach.
So a moment ago, you said there were lots of events around the Atlanta area
Yeah.
that students could go to. Can
Yeah,
you
you're at one of them.
I'm at one of them. I'd like to
No,
know-
you're at one of them.
Yeah.
Right now. Women in Film is really great. There's the Georgia 100, which and the Georgia Entertainment News hosts a lot of events where a lot of industry people get together. There's the GPP that has events. There's the VES, which is the Visual Effects Society. They host a number of events. So there's a lot of things going on. I mean, hell, we had Tom Cruise here for the opening of his movie. He was over at Atlantic Station. He came in and talked at the end of the movie. So stuff is happening here. Just need to look for it. And there's more and more stuff happening at Trilith, and they're pretty soon going to open up their 2 stages for live TV production and have big events for screenings of new movies. So there's even going to be more going on there. You have to kind of look for it sometimes, but there's actually quite a bit going on.
All right, next one's back here.
Hi again. So this is more of a storyboarding specific question. So could you walk us through a little bit of the difference between the pipeline in storyboarding for commercials, TV, and then animation? And if there's a lot of overlap or are they totally different?
There's a lot of differences. Biggest difference with commercials from other live action productions is you storyboard every shot for a commercial. Just like you storyboard every shot, or as you call it in animation, every scene. Because every time there's a cut in animation, it's called a new scene. In live action, every time there's a cut, we call it a new shot. You only get to a new scene when you change location or time. Okay? So the numbering is totally different in live action and animation. In live action, we do as few drawings per shot as possible, whereas animation, you do every keyframe. You cannot draw cartoony if you're doing live action. Directors and producers don't want to see it. So a lot of animation board artists can't make that transition because their style is just too cartoony. In live action, though, you can have virtually any other style, just not cartoony. In animation, if it's 2D, you have to match the exact look of the characters. You have to draw on model because those are obviously become the exact blueprints for the overseas studios. They'll, if anyone says this isn't right, that's exactly the way the storyboard artists do it. So if you draw it off model, the animation is going to be off model. In 3D animation, it's not the case. You can draw a tall, thin person looking like a short, round pig, and it's going to work. It doesn't matter. It's the breakdown of shots in 3D. It's the same thing with stop motion. You don't really need to match. Where I did find for storyboarding for stop motion, the last movie Jon Favreau did that was stop motion was called Alien Xmas. It's directed and produced by the guys who did Killer Clowns from Outer Space. If you guys are familiar with that. Well, they're friends of mine. So I was head of story on their movie. It's called Alien Xmas on Netflix, and it was all stop motion puppets.
Did you work with DeLon Warren on that?
Mm-mm. In doing stop motion, you need to understand the parameters of what the puppets can do. Like we had this one little girl that, in the script, she holds up a puppy. Her arms weren't long enough. She couldn't do it. So there are things like that you have to know in order to properly board something that can actually be done. So you've got to keep that in mind. I mean, those are, there's a number, actually, in both my book and my LinkedIn learning courses, I actually have an entire bit on it that covers all the differences. There's also screen direction is different as far as what a pan is versus camera moves and dollies, because in 2D animation, every camera move is called a pan. There's only one thing. Stationary camera that rotates back and forth, left and right on one axis is a pan. Everything else is either a dolly, a boom, a jib. There's a lot of different things. And too many people are saying, all right, we're going to pan over. It's like, no, that's a dolly. You know, that's not a pan. You need to know the differences. In live action, you also have to understand effects and stunts and lenses. When a director calls for a wide-angle lens, what does that mean? How is that going to affect what you're drawing? What are you going to see differently than if it was in a long lens? If you need to hide something, well, we need to put the camera way back because of safety issues with a long lens. Okay, so what does that mean? What are we going to be seeing? You have to understand all that and then be able to put it down in the notes of the storyboard, which in 2D animation, you don't have to do at all. So.
Hi. Hi, so my question was, you mentioned learning from books a lot when you were younger, or maybe still even now. What are some of those books that you would recommend specifically for learning live action storyboarding?
Mine. It's called Storyboards, Motion and Art. There are 3 editions. The first 2 are terrible, so get the 3rd one. But if you want to learn it better, go to my LinkedIn learning courses. It's more up to date, it's more info, just better than reading a book. One of the things, when I was talking about reading books, I mean, I've learned a lot of softwares through the books. I've worked with a lot of software vendors that didn't even understand the power of their own softwares. So I've ended up working with a lot of engineers and developers on helping them realize what their softwares can do, all the way back to Animo. If any of you know animation back then, Animo was prior to Toon Boom. And I'll give you for instance. Back in, I guess about 1988, something like that, I found out that one of the producers at Universal Studios in Orlando had just bought a CG computer system and a digital paint system. And this is before Photoshop existed. Yes, there was a time before Photoshop existed. There was a software called Rio. It was the only thing that you could really do any kind of detailed painting with. Well, when I found out about this, I was still designing at Nickelodeon. And so I went over to his office and said, hey, I heard you got this great system. I'd love to check it out. So he He's all proud. Oh yeah, let me show you. He walks me in and shows me this thing, and there's no one in the office because no one knew how to use it. He hadn't hired anyone, but he had spent a shitload of money buying all this stuff. And I asked him, I said, who's doing this? He goes, I'm going to spend some time learning. No one around here knows how to use this stuff. It's brand new. I said, would you mind if I came by after work on weeknights? I'll learn it. And he gave me a key to his office. And so I would walk in at night after I wrapped my shows at Nick. I'd go over and I'd crack open the book on Rio and I'd crack open the book on his 3D program. And I taught myself how to use his system. And because I knew the system, I was showing him along the way, hey, check this out, I figured this out and we could do this. He ended up landing a show, kind of like Cops, but it was called Firefighters. It was on NBC. And they needed some CG and some paint work on it. In particular, the paint work on doing wanted posters for the ATF was looking for people. I was the only one who knew it. I landed a broadcast show. The first thing I ever did professionally with CG was on Firefighters on NBC. Like I said, I usually start at the top. My first animation project was animating Tinkerbell for Disney. And that took me less than 15 minutes to land that job. And I had never done anything professionally. I just walked in and walked out with a contract.
Was it Peter Pan Tinkerbell or Tinkerbell?
Tinkerbell that actually launched the Disney Cruise Line that ended up being projected 60 feet high as part of their main stage show and in all their commercials that launched it.
So, yeah, okay. No,
Yeah.
not a flex. All right, our next one's right here.
Hello. I can't help if I'm being loud or not.
All right, the question round.
Closer. All right, okay. My question, clearly you are a seasoned veteran of the industry and you...
In other words, I'm old.
You're
You
old.
guys catch that?
You got
I'm a
tenure,
seasoned
man.
veteran with gray hair to prove it.
Yeah.
You know what? I'm proud of it.
You got tenure, you got
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah.
What can you tell us, the people who have recently graduated or are like afraid of graduating in this industry where suddenly we find that everybody's getting laid off and everybody is looking for work? What do you do?
Be better. Just be better than everyone else. And that's not always necessarily best art. Just better at getting out there. Better at getting your foot in the door. Better at making sure people know who you are. Better at being a part of these events and not just being a wallflower, but actually helping set it up. Like she was helping set everything up, so I know who she is.
Yeah.
Right? Be a part of the industry gets you into the industry. Sitting on your ass and wondering why you're not getting a job is why you're not getting a job. So get out there, get in front of people. I've done it my entire life. It's a very simple process. Just work your ass off, build up a great portfolio of stuff, even if you're not getting paid for it. If you do it, it's yours. Showcase it, and then get it in front of people. Step in one way or another. It's easier now than it's ever been. I didn't have the internet, and I figured out who to get in front of. Walk into offices, get on people's DMs, showcase your work, make sure you're always there, keep following up. If someone says, here's some notes, feel free to come back. If you don't show back up to show them new stuff, they will never hire you. I've had 2 or 3 people in the last 30 years show back up a second time. I hired every single one of them. You know who I didn't hire? People I never fucking heard from again. So if you get a note and someone says, feel free to come back, if you don't, you're an idiot. Get back in there. Do the work, show up early, show up great, communicate with people constantly. When you're delivering something, don't just assume they're going to be looking at their email. Text them or call them, hey, I just sent you an email. Make sure you get back to me if for some reason you don't see it because stuff ends up in spam, right? Don't wonder or make someone else wonder what's happening. Let them know to look for it, and then no matter what happens on their end, it's never your problem. That's how you keep working steadily in the industry.
Good stuff.
Obviously, I'm kind of passionate about that kind of stuff.
Hello. Who or what inspires you?
Every great cartoonist inspires me. Comic book artists were my original heroes and comic strip artists. Getting to know some of them over the last 10 or 20 years has been like the fucking thrill of my life. Sports stars don't mean anything to me. Actors are kind of cool to meet, but it's the artists. I love talking art to artists. I love seeing what they do. I mean, I could, like most comic book fans, I could take one glance and tell you who both the penciler and the inker were, right? That's when you're really studying the art of it. So that's who I look up to. As far as a story artist, Disney, because he kind of invented storyboarding. For animation, the Fleischer brothers. If you've never seen the Fleischer Superman pieces, you have missed some of the best animation ever produced. They are phenomenal. Pixar, it's great. I mean, I could actually go on and on and on, but it's cartoonists and comic book artists are really the ones who have inspired me the most.
Thank you.
And by the way, in case you don't know, everyone in Hollywood is a big comic book fan. There were times I'd be working through the night on a movie back when I was art directing, and if we had a nighttime call and I knew we were just going to be sitting there bored, because once we set up, the art department would just sit and wait on everything, I would go buy a ton of comics somewhere and I would just drop them down on a table in wherever our waiting area was. It didn't matter what crew it was. If they saw it, everyone picked one up. Grips, gaffers, producers, everyone are comic book fans. So if you're a fan, don't bother hiding it, because you're just one of us if you admit to it.
And unfortunately, this would be our last question, but y'all are welcome to walk up to him and ask him some of yourself, or reach out on LinkedIn and just talk to everyone here. But fortunately, we do have to mix up the mixer. So.
All right, last question. Better be good.
On projects where you had to work with other storyboard artists, what was the process like, and what did you learn from the experience?
I have never been under another story artist. I've only ever been a sole story artist, or I'm the head of the department. So it's generally what other people learn from me. I actually wrote the rules of storyboarding in the industry. I wrote the rate structure of the industry. So I set it up. Mostly there's a couple guys in particular who are so great, like Dave Lowery. A lot of people know Dave Lowery's work because he storyboarded Jurassic Park. He's the head of story for The Mandalorian. He worked for me on the Alien Xmas because he worked full time for Jon Favreau. John wanted him on this movie that I was doing. So we said, yes, of course. I would break down something and I would see what he would do to it. It was 10 times better than any idea I had ever come up with. So just working with him, it wasn't under him, just seeing his stuff inspired me to work harder to get better.
All right. And there is, before we break, there is a survey, and we are going to be able to get that up on the screen so y'all can get to that, or at least send it out in a mass text to one of the Discords we have here. It's just to kind of help us learn more about people's opinions about certain things going on. I do believe it is a survey about AI, so that's a hot topic. If your head's not under a rock, you know. Anyways, everyone give it up for Mark. Wow. And everyone say bye to the stream.
Bye, stream.
Yeah. Wait, how do I turn this off?